the Divorced Girl Smiling Podcast with your host, Jackie Pilosoff.
No one should have to go through a divorce feeling alone and isolated. The Divorced Girl Smiling Podcast is a production of Divorced Girl Smiling, where every show is 30 minutes aimed to empower you, help you feel validated and understood, and connect you with some of the best divorce professionals in the industry. So grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and start smiling as you join us right now for the Divorced Girl Smiling Podcast. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found and always at divorcedgirlsmiling.com. Before we get started, I want to ask you, don't you feel like the days are getting longer? That's because they are, because spring is basically here. And so is the list of things parents are juggling. From spring break to school projects and summer camp signups, co-parenting during spring can be especially stressful, especially if alcohol addiction is in the mix. If you're sharing custody with someone who struggles with alcohol, SoberLink is the most trusted tool to help keep your kids safe. SoberLink is a remote alcohol monitoring system that works like a high-tech breathalyzer. It uses facial recognition to verify identity, tamper detection to prevent cheating, and instant alerts so you're never left in the dark and you don't have to worry. Whether you're headed into mediation or modifying an existing agreement, family law professionals across the country trust SoberLink to support child safety and rebuild trust between parents. I say protect what matters most to you. Visit soberlink.com/DGS for Divorced Girl Smiling if you want to learn more and save $50 off your device. I also want to tell you about a wonderful wills and estate planning attorney. Her name is Emily Rozwadowski, and she's been doing this for like 17 years. When people's divorce is finalized, it's a huge relief and you feel like it's over. But what you might not realize, what I didn't anyway, is there's this huge to-do list that comes with a divorce being finalized. There's all these things you have to do per the agreement that you just signed in court. One of the things is getting a new will and trust, and you should do this no more than a few weeks after your divorce is final. If you live in Illinois, Emily Rozwadowski can help you get a post-divorce will and trust. She's great at it. I've referred so many people to her and they've been really happy. And the best news is that it's a fixed one-time cost. So it's not like you're paying Emily hourly. You just pay a cost and you can talk to her and ask questions as much as you want. If you want to learn more about Emily, go to emilyrozlaw.com. When people go through a divorce, you would think that everybody grieves. And that is true. But everybody grieves at different times, in different ways. Grief looks very different, very unique for each person. I want to dedicate this whole podcast episode to the topic of grieving a divorce. I think it's so important to grieve. I think that people need to learn tips on grieving and how to get over it if you're grieving too long. So we have a lot to cover. I have a great guest for this, one of my faves. Her name is Lisa Lisser. She's a certified divorce coach and the founder of LZL Coaching. Hi, Lisa.
Hey, Jackie. So great to be here.
So great to have you as always, Lisa. And do you agree with me that grieving is really important? And in your practice, do you often or ever worry about someone who's not grieving?
So, that's a really interesting question, Jackie, because I've had a few I've had a few discovery calls recently where people start to tell their story and the tears come, and they're tears of fear and they're tears of grief because they don't know what it's going to be when they take the next step. So this experience, it's physical. Grief is not just mental, it's physical. You have the physical reaction of tears. Maybe your throat closes up. Maybe you can't talk. Maybe you can talk and you can't stop talking. But grief presents differently for lots of people. So the question is, do I ever have a client who doesn't grieve? In that case, the answer is sometimes yes, because sometimes people are so sure of what they have to do because they've been thinking about it for so long and they're ready. They may appear self confident and as if they haven't grieved. And if I pose that to them, they may say, "Oh, I'm over that. I don't need to grieve." Um, I always take a pause because we don't know what we need to do when we need to do it. And so that's part of the coaching process. We walk through the process, and generally, some conversation will get us to a point where we start to discuss loss and the power of acknowledging loss so that you can move forward.
Okay, that was my next question. Why is it important to grieve? So let's just break this down. Grieving can look like a lot of different things. Anger is grief, fear is grief, sadness. What else?
So, there are these 5 stages of grief that have been identified just for the general concept of grief, where you are in denial, you're initially like failing to accept the reality of the divorce.
Almost like shock.
Right, you're in shock, like, you
Mhm.
can't believe that this marriage that you thought was one way, all of a sudden you see your partner had a totally different way, so you're in denial. You're grieving, and that's in denial. But you also can be really angry, like, you're so angry at your spouse for pulling the wool over your eyes, for cheating, for lying about money, for lying about anything, for for ruining your life and your children's lives, right? You feel all of these feelings of anger
A
that
lot of women say to me, they'll say, I wish I would have left 10 years ago. He wasted another 10 years of my life that I could have had. And 10 years ago, I was ready, and he convinced me to give him another chance. So they also are resentful that they wasted time.
right. So, I have a whole response to this idea of wasting time because part of who you're angry at is not your spouse, but it's yourself. Like, so I give people the space to forgive themselves because the journey is the journey. We don't always have the tools to change that trajectory while it's happening. Now you're at a moment of transition, and this is the moment that is supposed to be the moment. So I try to cool that anger about wasting 10 years of your life, regardless of whether you feel it. Because not that I'm saying it's not real, that feeling. I'm saying, of course, it's real. But if you stay stuck in that, it's going to be hard for you to move forward.
I
So,
couldn't agree more, and I also worry about people, though the ones I worry about the most are people who aren't angry and grieving. Like, they'll say things like, "Well," like this one woman said to me, "Well, my husband left me, but he had cancer, and, I think he's really confused." Like, in other words, she's excusing his decision to leave her because he was ill. And I felt like saying, "You need to get angry. You gotta get pissed about this. He left you and your kids." And I'm not saying that the woman should be angry for the rest of her life, but she needs to go through that anger and believe that she has entitlement to be angry for a little while, and even though she could feel sorry for her husband that he was ill, right?
right. Absolutely. Some people have been living in patterns where they don't allow themselves to feel angry. And so these neural pathways of making excuses for the other's behavior are ingrained in them. And that's where they actually have to learn new things. Like they have to start acknowledging that there's a loss here. There's a loss and the loss isn't only on her. That's something that I help them recognize, my clients, when they're saying, well, maybe it was not maybe I can forgive him because he was sick, which is what you're saying. Well, you can acknowledge that he was ill, but at the same time, there's a lot that happened that's not just about him. right? I think maybe see it more. I've had several cases where a spouse has come out as gay and then wanted to shift the whole dynamic and shifted the blame back to the wife. And then the wife says, well, I can't do anything about his gender identity and or sexual preference. I want to use the right words here. But the thing is that there is buried anger. And if you don't let that out, it's going to fester and it's going to impact the way that you walk in the world. So my role as divorce coach is to help you walk in the world with more power. And that means acknowledging that, yeah, something happened and it happened to you. It's not just about what happened to the other person, because this is also your story.
You're listening to the Divorced Girl Smiling podcast. My name is Jackie Pilosoff, and I'm your host. Today, I'm here with divorce coach Lisa Lisser, and Lisa and I are talking about grieving a divorce. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, Lisa, I'm going to go further with that question of what happens if you don't grieve. And then we're also going to talk about the case where people feel guilty about the divorce. And we're going to talk about tips to healing the grieving if you feel like you're grieving too long and it's taking too long and you just can't get over it. I've heard so often from people. We will be right back. If you're talking about assets in a divorce, I would say the home is not only the largest asset for most people, but a lot of times it's the asset that the couple is emotionally attached to. And in some cases, people even decide not to get divorced simply because they don't want to leave their home, but that's not good. If you are wondering if you can keep your home, if you want to try to keep your home, if you're not sure, I would highly recommend talking to Jeff Landers. Jeff is a CDLP and a CDFA and the founder of his practice, Divorce House Sense. He's the author of his book of the same name called Divorce House Sense: How to Keep Your Marital Home So You Can Move On, Not Out. If you want to learn more about Jeff, you can find him on his website, divorcehousesense.com, and you can also find him in the trusted professional section of Divorced Girl Smiling. I also want to talk about life after divorce. So if you're listening to this and you're pretty much through the divorce, it's almost done, and you're trying to figure out, what am I going to do after my divorce? What's my life going to look like? I have a great resource for you. It's called Rebranding Divorce. And Rebranding Divorce offers after divorce courses, memberships, workshops, and retreats. Carolyn and Mimi are the founders of Rebranding Divorce. They're two wonderful divorced women, and talking to them and being in their community is like having coffee with your best divorced girlfriends. I just love them. I love what they're offering. And their mission is to help people rebrand their life after divorce. So if you want to learn more about the community, all you have to do is go to rebrandingdivorce.com. And you can also find them in the trusted professional section of Divorced Girl Smiling. Welcome back to the Divorced Girl Smiling podcast. My name is Jackie Pilosoff, and I'm your host. And I'm here today with divorce coach Lisa Lisser. Lisa can be reached at lzlcoaching.com. Lisa is a separation, divorce, and spiritual coach. She's also a co-parenting coach. And Lisa, let's continue this conversation about what happens if you don't grieve. So you sort of like said, okay, it can be unhealthy, but what does it look like? People who don't grieve, what happens to them?
So I think it's about kicking the can, right? It's like kicking the can down the road, because you can feel like everything is great right now. You're finally out of this terrible situation. You feel a great sense of relief. You feel like now is the beginning of your next best life. And then things don't go exactly as you plan. And how you respond later can bring the grief from the past into the future. So that what I'm saying is that there is a danger of like getting hit like with a ton of bricks 6 months later, a year later, 3 years later, when you haven't grieved. You know what I will share, if you
Uh-huh.
don't mind, is that in my case, I had been in a marriage that I felt like I was grieving for a long time, and I started seeing someone else seriously, and we were together for 4.5 years. And then when that relationship ended, I grieved so much. I was in such deep sadness for so long. And I think part of that was I was grieving my
Both.
as well as this other.
Mhm. It's so funny that you would say that, and I'm so sorry you went through that, but I was gonna use the exact same example, and when I have read this, there's a great book called Crazy Time, which is a very old divorce book, which I think is still one of the best, and what the woman says is that when people get into a relationship after divorce, when that relationship ends is when the worst grieving happens because you're reliving your whole divorce and that sense of loss double because now it happened to you again. And it's like, how much can I take? And if you don't take the time to grieve your first breakup, your divorce, it's going to be 10 times worse. And what you did, Lisa, is really, really typical of so many people who get divorced. Really, me too. I did something similar, although I went for a guy who was totally unobtainable and would sort of string me along, and all I could focus was I got to get this guy to fall in love with me. And my therapist at the time said, you don't really love this guy or care. You are so trying to avoid grieving your divorce. So you're putting all your energy into this guy who you barely know, and you think you love him when you don't even know him just because you can't get him, and that's what you're focusing on. Isn't that interesting?
It is really interesting, but it's also something that happens all the time. And part of what I share with my clients is that it's not your fault. You don't have to blame yourself. You know, there are rules. You shouldn't date right after divorce. You should get to know yourself. And that is true. And sometimes you have felt like you had so little love in the marriage that when someone shows you love, you're falling head over heels right away. And maybe you need that experience in order to feel acknowledged and beautiful and smart and all of those things that you didn't feel in the marriage. But when that relationship doesn't turn out the way you dreamed, then you have a harder fall.
I
So
couldn't agree more, and what I wanna say to people listening is, if you've done this or you're in the process, it's okay. Nobody's judging you. I'm not judging Lisa, I'm not judging myself. This is what we do to self-protect and to not feel that intense loneliness that we might have felt for the last few years of our marriage. So, it's okay. We just wanna prepare you that when you skip grief and try to cover it up with a band-aid of a relationship or alcohol and going out or excessive shopping, and you try to put off the grief, you're going to be unsuccessful at it at some point. It's going to catch up with you, and that's okay. So, do you think, Lisa, that grief also looks like, and I think it's healthy, I don't know if you'll agree with me, those days where you're crying so hard and you just can't even stop and you just cry all day, you have a lump in your throat. I mean, that's okay.
think that's part of the grieving process. Look, if that lasts for a very long time, they say, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. Like if you can't get out of bed, that's a different kind of problem. But to have days that are sad days that hit you from left field, you're not expecting it. That's actually normal. That's actually something that happens to all of us. It could happen, 10 years later where your life is going great and then one thing happens. Your spouse gets remarried, right? And you didn't think it would bother you, but You're sad. You don't.
Okay, I have to tell this story because I think it's really important about what you just said. I I got divorced in 2008. In 2014, so now we're talking about
Sick.
6 years later, okay? I was sitting in the stands of my then 5th grade son's basketball game, and I kinda, like, glanced over, and I'm looking over my shoulder, and I was sitting next to a really good friend of mine, and I go, "Does that look like an engagement ring on her finger?" And I was asking about my ex's girlfriend, and she kinda looks over really slowly, and she's like, "Maybe it's her grandmother's ring." And right then, I knew my ex was engaged, and I burst into tears in the stands trying to hide not because and then people would say, "Well, why'd you cry? Do you wanna get back together?" No, I'm still grieving. Now, not to mention I was in a relationship that I was not happy with, and I knew in my heart it wasn't going anywhere, and it wasn't gonna work out, but I was still grieving my marriage 6 years later. So little moments of grief can just pop up at any time and trigger you.
It's not a little thing. But, when your spouse gets engaged, that's not a little thing, it's a big thing. And part of what you're grieving is not just the marriage, but it's the life that you had. It's the social community that you had that was all married couples. It's the parents, the PTO. It's the relationship you have with the other moms at school. Like everything changes when you get divorced. So it's natural to feel loss. And you need to acknowledge that you're going through it. When you're in the denial stage, it's it may be safer, but you have to get through it. And everybody does, but it goes back and forth. That's what growth.
Right, and I hope people listening don't think that after 6 years, you're still gonna be falling apart, and that wasn't the case at all. I had had a very happy 6 years, many, many happy, wonderful times, and I was over the divorce, but certain triggers can and that's a big one, like Lisa said, can set you off. So, all I'm saying is, you're not gonna be crying hysterically after 6 years of the marriage, but I didn't realize that I was still grieving, and maybe we're all gonna be grieving a little tiny bit forever. It doesn't mean that you're not gonna have a great life or fall in love again, which I did, after I ended the non-productive relationship, and, you know but you might always have a little thing of grief that you carry around.
And that's because there was a point in your marriage that you had real love. And anytime you have a relationship with someone where there was love, there's grief when the love is gone. And that could be, a parent child relationship, that could be a sibling relationship. You care about these relationships, they matter to you. You may have children with this person. So there is so much that's intertwined that of course you're going to grieve. And if you feel like you don't want to deal with the grief part now, that's okay. We all need to do the things we need to do to move forward, but we also need to acknowledge that sometimes that pain is going to hit us. And rather than think, I thought I should be over this by now, you can think, oh, so now I'm feeling it. Like, give yourself a little grace. Because I think I wrote an article, like, I thought I should be over this by now.
Mhm,
Because even now I'm at 10 years past my divorce. But
mhm.
a couple of years ago, I just had a moment with the kids and the loss and the spouse, and it was really hard.
Wow, and, that when you do cry in a moment like 2 years ago, did you feel like almost like relieved? Like, "Okay, I got this out now. I felt it. Now I can even move on more."
Yeah, definitely.
I love it. Okay, Lisa, what about people who feel guilty? Let's say there's someone listening to this and they're like, I feel so guilty because I feel nothing. I don't feel grief. I already cried for the last 3 years of my marriage trying to fix it. I'm over it. I am ready to move on with my life.
That's real. People do that. people have been grieving 5, 10 years during the marriage. And so they may have completed that stage of the process. So they are energized. They are so happy to be into the next chapter that they're ready. At the same time, these people may be hit by a little grief a few years down the road. Just because they say, I'm not feeling grief, I feel guilty, I should feel something. Like my work is about there should never be a should, right? There are no shoulds. Like we all experience different things. We had different marriages, we had different relationships. So, whatever you're feeling may be the right thing for you to be feeling right at that moment.
Mhm.
And when something different happens and you feel something else, that's okay too.
Right. And there's also a big difference between how you're feeling. Let's say you're one of these people, you're not having any grief, you feel like you already grieved, but then you might have a whole new phase of grief after you are officially divorced, thinking, wow, this really happened. Or moving out, you might say, well, wow, now I'm grieving the fact that I live alone now. And, I don't have a husband. I mean, it doesn't mean you're never going to grieve again.
Right. Now, what
Okay.
like before you go, when we are talking about this, I had a flashback to the scene in When Harry Met Sally. And Sally and her boyfriend broke up, and she's hanging out with Harry. And then she hears that her boyfriend is getting married, and she falls apart. And she comes to the conclusion that she was okay with him saying, "I don't want a serious relationship. I don't want children. I don't wanna get married." And then she heard he got married, and she starts grieving, "Oh, it was really all about me." And so that's a danger, right? In that movie, that they found the humor in that, but in real life, it's hard to find the laugh because all of a sudden we're like, "Oh my god, this really is my life. This really is my story."
Okay, so that is one of my favorite movies of all time, and what's so interesting is that remember the whole time Harry keeps saying to her, "I never hear you cry. I never hear you be upset." And she's like, "I'm fine. I'm fine. I don't miss him. I'm fine." So she was completely in denial, and then the grief hit her when she heard he was getting married. And really it was because she realized that he just didn't wanna marry her. He wanted kids and a wife, he just didn't want it to be her, and that's a pretty crappy feeling because 'cause I've had that happen to me too. So,
Yeah.
okay, before we run out of time, do you have any tips to offer to people who feel like, "I can't stop grieving, I'm so sad all the time. I just think about maybe we can get back together, and I can't get over this." How do you get out of the rut?
So, the tool for getting out of the rut is to forgiving yourself. You need to forgive yourself for feeling sad, right? You're allowed to feel sad. So, first, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for feeling like you failed in the marriage because that also keeps you stuck. And recognize that you're allowed to look forward. You don't have to only look back. And that now you're at a point in your life where you could be forward facing. So, my tips are focus on the future. You have strengths. There are people who love you. You need to learn to love yourself because part of divorce is the rejection, is feeling, even if you were the one who called it, even if you were the one who called the death of the marriage, you're feeling rejection. And that's why you're making this decision. So perhaps, or for some people, so maybe it's time to say, it wasn't the right thing for me, for us. So let me move forward. And now I have the opportunity to find the right person, to find myself and set some goals. Like, what goals can you set for yourself? Like, maybe you want to just start an online profile, right? Like maybe that's your goal. Like you hate the idea of online dating, you're terrified, but maybe you can decide that now is the time to start my profile. And I would recommend Alyssa Deneen, one of our, trusted professionals who is like the
Same.
expert. She and I have talked because I wanted to like test out her product for my clients, and it's been really fun. And rediscover yourself. Like recognize that you have different talents and skills that maybe were pushed down while you were married. Now is the time for you to blossom.
Okay, I have a tip, which I thought this was going to be your tip, but I'm going to give the tip for you. You need a divorce coach. This is how you get out of the grieving process. Everything Lisa said is true about forgiving yourself and setting goals. But what a divorce coach does is they do it with you. They hold you accountable. They help you figure out what the heck you want to do now. What are your goals? Maybe you don't even know what your goals are. That is what Lisa is here for. I think that the advice I give people now is do not get divorced without a divorce coach. I'm not kidding, because you have that sense of support to help you and hold your hand through the entire divorce. It is so, so crucial, in my opinion. But before I forget, I also want to give you Alyssa Deneen's website, which is stylemyprofile.nyc.com, because Alyssa is a wonderful dating coach. And you could hire both Lisa and Alyssa. They do totally different things. Okay, so Lisa, anyway, thank you so much for being on the show.
Before you
Yes.
thank me, there's one more thing.
Mhm.
I want people to acknowledge that grief takes time, right? Give yourself the grace to recognize that you're not going to be over it right away. And if you think you're over it right away and it hits you later, don't get angry at yourself. Recognize grief takes time. Be patient with yourself and celebrate your small victories, right? Like, so if you are finally going out to dinner, even just with friends for the first time as a single person, that's a victory. That's
Mhm.
a win. So I just want people to understand that grief takes time, but
Right.
every step gets you through the process.
Baby steps. And also, if you have a really bad date, you can be like, okay, I got the first one out of the way. So, right now, I'm actually watching the show Younger, which might be the best show I've ever watched in my entire life. It's the same writer as Sex and the City. I cannot even tell you how funny that show is, and this woman says she calls them pancakes. So the first person you date after your divorce or a breakup is your pancake, because you know how you make pancakes and the first one you just ruin it and it ends
Yeah.
up burned and awful and you have to throw it away, and then you go on to make better pancakes. So you gotta get that pancake out of the way.
Yeah.
All
I
right,
love
we are totally out of time. But Lisa, thank you so much for being on the show. What a great conversation.
it was a lot of fun. And, I always love being on here. And I know you're helping so many women. We're helping so many women and men get through this really hard process. And thanks for the opportunity to share.
Oh, Lisa, I feel the same way about you. And if you want to find Lisa, you can go to lzlcoaching.com, or you can find her in the trusted professional section of Divorced Girl Smiling, divorcedgirlsmiling.com, where you can also find tons of other wonderful, trusted, vetted divorce professionals like financial advisors, mediators, real estate agents, a person who buys back rings, anything you need during and after divorce. And you can also listen to more podcasts, read articles, or sign up for my free consult. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. We'll talk to you real soon.